So I'm really pleased to be speaking today with a dear friend and colleague, Ian Watson. And just to give you a little bit of background, I first stumbled across Ian and his work. I think it was as far back as kind of 2003. And Ian had created a cassette recording at the time called, I think it was called Living Abundantly. A friend of mine who was a homeopath shared that with me. And it really had a profound impact on me because at the time I had been, an NLP trainer and that sort of thing, but I had a spiritual understanding and I was having trouble kind of seeing where the two met. And listening to Ian's take on the stuff that I was interested in just really kind of lit something up for me. What happened as I listened to the recording was I had insights and realizations, which I didn't know that's what they were at the time. Like it was much later as I got into the principles that I realized what had happened there. But one of the things that was clear to me listening to that recording was that Ian was in touch with something that was very real and alive for him and that he was able to share with other people. And so I reached out and connected with him, and we've been friends and have become colleagues kind of ever since. And so it's a huge pleasure to have you with us here today, Ian. Welcome.
Big pleasure to be here, Jamie. And yeah, it's funny to hear that time span is quite substantial that we've known each other, and lovely now that it feels like we're both on a parallel journey with, with coming into the principles and so on. And yet each expressing it in our own unique way, which is
well, and I think that's a great way of saying it, because the kind of the theme for this conversation, the thing I wanted to explore with you, is this idea of unique expression and bringing our unique expression to life. And I wanted to share a quote with you that I find very kind of meaningful. It's from the choreographer Martha Graham, and she said, there is a vitality, a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And because there's only one of you in all of time, this expression is unique. And if you block it, it will never come through any other medium, and it will be lost. The world will not have it. And that idea of something like, words often get devalued by overuse. So, but the notion of unique, as in there is only one of you in all of time, and there is something that life is, wanting to bring through you, or something. So I guess the question I wanted to ask you, Ian, because the sense I've always had of you is that, like for me and many other people in the kind of personal development, self-development world, however you want to describe it, we've kind of been through a period of life and then kind of found our way into this work through trying to heal ourselves and that sort of thing. My sense of you was that you were kind of on this path from very early in the game, out of just an interest in it, if I remember correctly, from when you were a teenager. So would you say a little bit maybe about your journey and what unique expression means to you?
Absolutely, yes. And yes, you're right. I feel like I got lucky because I stumbled into what felt like at least the first iteration of my life path in my teens. And that was, the way it happened was just through following an interest, which I had initially just in the natural world. I had an interest in plants and trees, which I then discovered were also medicines. And had been, there was a tradition behind that, a tradition of herbal medicine. This whole thing just fascinated me as a teenager. I can't tell you why. My son's fascinated in trains. He doesn't know why, but it was like that. It was just, that was my interest. And I lived in a place where I could just walk from my parents' house into nature. And that's where I spent all of my kind of free time. And then as I started to get more interested in that, I discovered that there, people had done things with it. They turned it into systems of healing, like herbal medicine, flower essences, homeopathy. These were the things that grabbed me. Mm-hmm. And I think I got lucky in two ways. One was that I stumbled on something that I was interested in. But I mean, we all do that, I think. Everybody has at least some things that they're interested in. But I think what I really got lucky to recognize was that I could give myself permission to follow that and things would work out. Somehow that could become my work in this life. And I think a lot of people don't realize that step. You know, a lot of people will have it in the category of, well, this is an interest, it's a hobby. But I have to do something else, you know, to pay the bills in the real world, which was very much my parental kind of message. You know, that's what my parents thought I should be doing. And I tried that for a couple of years. I had a real job in an office for a while, which was boring as anything. And I just used to spend my time reading homeopathy books, you know, and it quickly became apparent to me that that's what I needed to be doing. And so I just started to follow that thread. And so the bulk of my work was in the healing arts for the first, 20, 25 years. I mean, still is to a large extent. That was my interest. And then through that, well, through yourself, actually, coming across three principles, understanding, seeing how that dovetailed beautifully with what I'd already come to discover for myself. And it just simplified everything and it made sense of everything. And it showed me the power of insight, which, like you, I'd been having insights all over the place, but I didn't know that's what was going on. So that was so helpful to me to have that be kind of made conscious was fantastic. And I think when I look back now, what I can see, the thread that's run through my work, although it had that healing aspect, when I worked with a lot of people initially as a homeopath, I became like a substitute GP at first. You know, people go to homeopaths because the doctors haven't been able to help them, typically. And I did that for about 15 years, helping people with health problems. And then I realized what I was really interested in was helping them beyond that point, rather than just helping them to get relief from symptoms or, you know, to have ailments go away. I was more interested in people who wanted to have something really transform in their life. So that interest was also there. And that started to become more conscious for me, and it became more what I was drawn towards. So gradually the other aspects fell away, the homeopathy and so on became less of something that I wasn't using that so much in practice. I was interested in what happens when I sit with someone and I listen in and we go into some kind of a space together where some magic happens. And that's, to me, was where the juice was. And so my work has really taken that form ever since. To me, it's all about creating a space for people to have insight and to have a shift in consciousness.
Yeah, I love that. And similarly, that's what I'm fascinated with, the whole transformation. And so while I respect the people come often with symptoms or problems they want solved or goals they want to achieve and that sort of thing, and I kind of honor that, I also really honor the bigger space of the transformation, because often things like symptoms, they're a doorway into a new way of living, a new world, and that sort of thing.
I call it the entry ticket.
I like it. Yeah. Yeah. Ian, you said something which I think is absolutely huge. You said it as a sentence or two, but I think it's absolutely huge for in what we're talking about, because you were talking about following your fascination. And my sense is the things we're fascinated in, the word enthusiasm, as I'm sure you know, it comes from entheos, meaning the God within. It's like, I've always thought of it as like, it's God letting us know, yeah, you're on the right track. Yeah. And so following that fascination, but you said, I gave myself permission to follow it in the knowledge that things would work out if I did. And that looks absolutely crucial to me. Like and there's another quote for me that kind of relates to it that I'd love to read. This one's from Terence McKenna. He said, well, this is one of my favorites. He said, nature loves courage. You make the commitment and nature will respond to that commitment by removing impossible obstacles. Dream the impossible dream and the world will not grind you under. It will lift you up. This is the trick. This is what all these teachers and philosophers who really counted, who really touched the alchemical gold, this is what they understood. This is the shamanic dance in the waterfall. This is how magic is done, by hurling yourself into the abyss and discovering it's a feather bed. Now, that sounds quite dramatic compared to how you put it. which was like, yeah, I just kind of gave myself permission to follow it and knew that things would work out. Was there courage involved in that? Or was it like, did you just know?
I think there was some courage involved in it. And actually, it's lovely hearing that quote from Terence McKenna, because it reminds me of a quote that helped me a lot to make that step, which was from Joseph Campbell, which probably more people will be familiar with. The succinct version is basically follow your bliss. Mm. And the longer version, follow your bliss and doors will open where you didn't even know there were doors.
Yeah, I love that.
Now, I came across that again in my, I think, probably late teens or early 20s, when I was just trying to find my orientation. And what that said to me was exactly what Terence McKenna is pointing to in his own words, was that there's something that we can trust in, which is invisible to us, and it only gets revealed when we start moving in what feels like the right direction to move in. So there has to be that leap of faith element. And somehow having that flagged up for me, I found that really helpful. I was like, okay, that's how it works then. Yeah. It's like you take the leap first without knowing with any certainty how things are going to play out. But if you are following your bliss and you're listening in to what feels like the right thing at the right time, then things will work out in ways that you can't predict and you can't foresee. So for me, the courageous aspect in that early stage of my life was quitting my job, which represented safety and security. And, I think it even had a pension attached to it and things like this. And they wanted to train me to be a solicitor or something. It was like, oh my God.
the road less traveled.
Yeah, which from my parents' perspective was the dream job. It had everything that looked important and necessary to them, the security and all of that. And to me, it looked like some kind of slow death prison. There was no juice in it for me. So for me to quit that without even being clear on what I was going to do next, I think did take some courage on my part. But to be honest, Jamie, I didn't feel like I had much to lose at that stage in my life. Fortunately, I was still young and single, and I didn't have dependents and so on, which I think once we start to accumulate more of those things, it's easier to get caught in a story of what we think we have to be doing and ought to be doing and should be doing and must be doing and must continue to do, And I didn't really have that much of that to give up. So for me, it was a leap into the unknown, but it's like, what was the worst that could happen? Well, I have to go back and find a real job again,
Well, and it's so interesting that you've reminded me of something, which is that what's the worst thing that could happen used to be almost like my mantra for doing stuff. I kind of forgot that. You've just reminded me of it. And when I first started my first business, it's funny. It felt like it took courage, but it also, I kind of knew it was the right thing to do, to quit my job and do my own thing. And I never forget, I had a conversation with a friend a few months later, maybe 6 months later. He said, how's it going? And of course, I was in the early days of my starting a business. I was like, oh, this is challenging, and I'm doing this and I'm working on that. And I was like, and he said, oh, do you regret it? I said, what? He said, quitting your job. I'm like, fuck no, like not even close, like never once. And it's so funny, like, no, that's like 24, 25 years ago, but just never once. It's
same here. I never once looked back from that day when I handed in my notice. And then I had and it was interesting because there was about a 9-month period where I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew what the general direction was. I knew what I was interested in. So I just gave myself a timeout and I read loads of homeopathy books. And then through a series of synchronicities, I discovered there was a homeopathy training school, which I didn't even know existed. I thought it was something that died out in the last century,
Right.
All the books.
This is pre-internet, right?
Yes, exactly.
through a combination of catalogs and letter writing, I discovered.
Yeah, and I went to a conference with where Krishnamurti was speaking. The spiritual teacher. I'd read some of his books. I was inspired by his writing. I went to this conference, and I was it was like a 3-day thing at Brockwood Park in Hampshire, which was one of his places where he gave talks. And I was camping there, and it poured down. It was like Glastonbury, it was like a sea of mud. And while I was staying there, I saw these guys trying to get a Citroen CV out of the mud, you know, with the thin wheels, and it was spinning. They couldn't get out. I offered to give them a push. Didn't know these guys. Gave them a push. They thanked me and said, we're going to the local village to have something to eat in the pub. Do you want to come with us? I said, sure. I jumped in the car. We got to the village. The guy who's driving the car takes his jacket off and he's wearing a sweatshirt that says College of Homeopathy.
Amazing.
My eyes were like on stalks. It was like, there's a College of Homeopathy. Where I'd never heard of it. I didn't know such a thing existed. And it's like, oh yeah, sure. It's like, where is it? It's in London. It's like, okay, I'm moving to London. And that was it, you know, and that to me was the proof of what Joseph Campbell says happens.
It's so interesting, you know, a couple of things came up for me. Like one of the things I wanted to ask you about that Joseph Campbell quote was about kind of trust and faith. And then as you talked about the synchronicity, it had me again remembering when I was first starting my business, there seemed to be all these synchronicities, not all of which were necessarily useful or that sort of thing, but it has me wondering, are those synchronicities actually there all the time? But when we're not kind of following that intuition or following that, we're kind of blinkered to them. Like we're too caught up in our ideas about how life should work or what we should be doing or that sort of thing. And so we don't notice them. Like, I don't know how you would know the answer to that question, but
I'm sure that that's the case. That's my sense, because when those things start to line up, it's often there's like a run of them, isn't there? You get like which is what happened for me. And you have that sense of really just being in the flow, but it's almost like it's like something's been revealed that was always there. That's what it feels like to me. It's not like you've kind of flicked a switch and things are different now. Something's just been revealed to you. And that flow, my sense is that we're always in the flow of life, but as you say, we don't always recognize it because there's interference.
Yeah, sometimes we're running around like this.
Yeah. We're giving all of our attention to something else and getting distracted by that. And life, meanwhile, is giving us all these little nudges and signals. We're saying like, no, I'm too busy for that. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, that makes a lot of sense to me. And in terms of the Campbell quote, what is it? Because what it implies is a faith in or a trust in something deeper, either something deeper about how, like, I like the way you put it. You said, oh, so that's how it works. And that's kind of, once you know how something works, that is a different level of understanding to, beliefs or that sort of thing. But what's your sense of it in terms of that?
Yeah. And well, for me, it also, I think it aligned with something else that I'd already started to intuit, which was that who we are is not this body or personality, that these are just temporary forms, but that who we are is, let's say, the consciousness that's inhabiting this form is something eternal, but which is taking form in order to have a particularly unique expression in this lifetime. But that energy, if you like, is some people call it the soul or higher self. I don't think it matters what we call it, but that to me was very much a part of my understanding, even at a relatively young age. And again, I feel grateful and fortunate that felt true to me when I came across that in various different spiritual teachings and traditions. And Joseph Campbell points to that as well, that there is an energy and an intelligence behind life, just as Sydney Banks says, but also that energy localizes as a 7 billion individual souls at this current given moment, each of which has a unique role to play in bringing that consciousness to life, to bringing it into form. So to me, that has always been something that's informed my life journey, if you like, that sense of I'm not here to figure out what I should be doing. My role is to listen in to what is it that my soul is here to grow into and evolve into and express through this form.
I really like that way of putting it. It's like, because we live in a world that is so, like, every day seems to point our attention more and more to the personality and to the little s self and that sort of thing. And there's a quote by Teilhard de Chardin that I love bastardizing. He said, the way I say it is, we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're one spiritual being having 7 billion human experiences. And who you really are is that one spiritual being. And the thing that I notice is that, you and I both share this principles understanding. And part of the nature of sharing that is kind of getting everyone on the same page about something that's already true, right? So there's something that's kind of convergent about it. And yet, when it comes to whatever each one of us is here to do, our unique expression, that's profoundly divergent. And it's one of the things I've noticed as, you and I have had many conversations over the years about like on the one hand, there's this wonderful community of people, 3 principles with its, various beliefs and ideas. And then there's the truth of these principles. And the nature of community is kind of binding together and convergent, but the nature of unique expression is divergent. So there's this almost like a tension between wanting to fit in, whether that's fitting in with a community or fitting in with society, or, the tendency to conform versus unique expression, which I guess often risks criticism, judgment, that sort of thing. How you mentioned your parents wanted you to be a solicitor and you felt a call to something deeper. I imagine you've run up against that kind of push-pull of conformity or fitting in or whatever versus following your heart. How have you found that over the years?
Interesting. I haven't run into it that much, Jamie. To be honest, it's as like you said, I've never once had a moment's regret that I didn't take the path more traveled rather than the one less traveled, and it's never once occurred to me to settle down and get a real job, even at the points in time when it's felt very uncertain, when I've been in debt, or I've had accumulated lots of things that were drawing on my energies and becoming very expensive to maintain, and I was like, how the hell am I going to do this? When I've gotten bogged down like that, which we all do from time to time, I think for me, that's all. I've always somehow known that was just an invitation to go deeper in the direction I was already going. It wasn't something that ever threw me off path, back into conformity or doing what looked like the safer option or what everybody else is doing. I've always seen it as an opportunity to leap further into the abyss, which I know it sounds a bit crazy, and sometimes it looks a bit crazy to me as well, but that has been my own tendency, has been, if things, when I've reached a point where there's no juice in it anymore for me in the way that it's been expressed at this moment. And I think that just happens naturally. Yeah. We outgrow the forms that we create. And when that's happened for me, what I've learned works is just to completely let that form go and just to put myself back in the unknown place where I'm awaiting further instructions.
I really like that. And my tendency over and like you say, maybe that's for all of us, but I'll tend to create something that comes from insight and inspiration. And I create it and I'm really excited about it and it goes great and that sort of thing. And then when it's time to let it go, it's like, I want to hang on to it. It's like, rather than letting life wash it away or like taking the next step. And so my journey on many occasions has been one of having to, like, one example was when I first stumbled across the principles in late 2008 and realized, oh, these are the future of psychology. And I've been teaching NLP for the last 10 years, and now I'm going to change direction. That was a real letting go. And I think you're right. I think it's kind of part of life, isn't it? That, I mean, if we look to the natural world, we see the seasonality of life, and yet the kind of the I don't know, the societal message that I kind of pick up from the way that corporations work and the way that a lot of people talk about their everything from morning routines to how they work and that sort of thing, it doesn't really speak to that seasonality. of things, and yet
no, it doesn't. And often those things that people get into as their routine, it's often driven by a sense of what the person thinks they should be doing, what they feel is expected of them, what they're expecting of themselves, what they've come to believe is the only way that they can pay their bills or support their family, which is always a limited, I would call that an ego-driven view or an insecurity-driven view. You know, we're looking through a limited lens of from our own personality, and all we can see through that lens is based on what we've done before. You know, we're drawing on what our previous life experience, and it's always going to be a very limited perspective. Whereas if we're able to just put that to one side to some extent, to let that go, we're right back in the field of infinite possibility immediately. Immediately, there's a much bigger field of possibility available to us, where there are things that we literally couldn't think of a moment ago, suddenly able to pop into our mind and go, oh, well, I could ring this person. Let's have a conversation. I could, maybe I'll just take a time out and I'll go and do this. And when you take the time out and you go and do this, by the time you come back, you're full of bright ideas. You know, something has shifted because your energy is now in a different place. And that's what I've learned is all about the energetics is what I listen into. I'm not so concerned with the practical. Maybe a little bit, you know, I sometimes ought to be a bit more concerned than I am. Because sometimes I'm aware I'm sailing very close to the wind, you know, and yet it's always worked out. And that's what I always come back to. It's like, it's always worked out. So if I find myself getting worried that I am a bit closer, it's like, what am I really worried about? It's like, it's always worked out, and usually in better ways than I could have imagined.
It raises a couple of things. I mean, one is that you've got, by this point, you've got a bunch of experience that shows you what you can rely on. You know, it reminds me of one of the areas where I'd say I'm most attuned to that energy and that aliveness is when I'm working with groups and when I'm coaching, and I so trust it that it wouldn't occur to me to trust anything else in those contexts. It's just, it doesn't make sense anymore. But that was a process. I've got, part of that is because I've got a bunch of experience of being able to rely on that, seeing that the results that come up are better than anything I could have thought of. So trusting it. But the other thing it suggests to me is you may have a tolerance for that's higher than some, like everyone has different tolerances for different things. And you may that may be part of your unique expression as well, is
I think that's
fine with sailing close to the wind.
I think that it is a variable. That's what I've learned. It's a variable because I'm aware that some of the decisions I've taken, that it wasn't really a decision, it just felt like the right thing to do, so I did it. It often looks crazy to most of the people that I know.
and it might actually be crazy for them, because they're not.
Yes,
it's really interesting. One of the things that's become very clear, I don't know if you and I have ever spoken about this, but it really looks to me these days like people are always doing what makes sense at their current level of understanding. And that would include their understanding of the stuff we've been talking about today. And so I never know what's the right thing for someone else to do, because they're much more in touch with all the variables in their life and all the different things.
So that's true, Jeremy, but you and I both know when you're having a conversation with someone and maybe they're sharing what look like the possibilities, and then they stumble on they mention something, maybe in passing.
Yeah.
You know that's it.
Yeah.
Sometimes even when they haven't yet recognized it.
Yeah.
So
and you'll point them to it.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So again, it's like, well, what is that? What's different about that? There's an energy behind it.
Yeah, for sure.
There's juice in it. And I mean, the way that might manifest is that it frightens the hell out of them. And yet it's fascinating to them at the same time. You know, it can take different forms. I think sometimes a person just naturally feels inspired to do something like I did. Other people, it can take the form of there's something in the world that's bugging them that they see they could do something about, and they're not doing it. and it won't leave them alone.
Yeah.
That's another form that it can take. That's the thing that is they're being pulled towards. There's something in that for them. It doesn't interest me.
Yeah.
But for them, that thing that's bugging them it's like there's some kind of grit in the oyster there, and it's going to keep working away at them until they turn towards it and address it in some sense. So I think we're getting these clues, these signals all the time in different forms.
Yeah. Ian, we've been talking in a general way, but for you, what are some of the examples of how your unique expression has kind of manifested, or how you've manifested that over the years? I mean, I mentioned the cassette recordings that I first came across you and your work, which were to me, those were a wonderful expression.
Yeah. It's funny because that was an insight again, which it took me years to have the insight, and then a lot more years to realize that that's what it was, because I was doing seminars and group trainings for a long, long time. Here's an example of how the form that our expression takes can change, but the energy behind it hasn't really changed. It's just finding a new outlet. So when I was at homeopathy training school, which I just loved, I loved the whole experience. I'd landed on my feet. I was with my tribe. I was doing what I was passionate about. And I assumed I was training to be a homeopathic practitioner, which I was, but until about halfway through the training, a particular teacher came in. He was invited over from the US, and his name was Robin Murphy. And it was the first time he'd come to the UK to teach. And this guy just sat in front of us, and he just started to share in a way that I'd never heard anyone teach anything in my life. And I was transfixed. And I knew in that moment, I wanted his job. I wanted to do what he was doing because of the way that I felt in his presence.
Yeah.
There was just something in the way that he was just so open and relaxed, and it was so inspiring. Listen to him. I immediately felt empowered that I could just go out and start practicing tomorrow. That was the feeling I had. It was empowering and enlivening. I thought, wow, what a gift. I want to have some of that as part of my work. So I became a teacher in that moment.
Beautiful.
That was never on my radar before. I used to be really shy. As a kid, the last thing I would think to do was put myself in front of a room full of people and speak to them. My God, it would have been a terrifying idea. Somehow I forgot about that and knew that this is what I was going to do. So I started teaching very quickly after I left college. And then I started doing seminars. And I did a whole bunch of seminars. And like you, I found that the more I did, the better I got at it. And I really enjoyed that interaction with groups. And then I had people who missed the seminar, and we would get in touch with me and say, well, what did you make a recording? I was like, oh, no, I didn't. But there's an idea. I got myself a Sony recording Walkman, which was high tech at the time. And started recording the seminars, and then I had to find a way to get them duplicated and selling them as tapes initially, and then it became CDs, and then it became MP3s. So I went through all of these things. But to me, that was, it was just a different iteration of the same work, and finding different ways to connect with the people who are interested. What I also found was that when I was getting burnt out as a homeopath, excuse me, which is what happened after about 15, 16 years, I'd been really busy for a period of about 4 or 5 years. I was running my own training school by this point. I had a group homeopathy practice, and I was teaching all over the place, traveling all the time. And I remember the window cleaner came when I was with a client, and he was like cleaning the windows. I'm sat with the client. I'm looking at this guy. He's got a big smile on his face. He looks like he hasn't got a care in the world. And I was thinking, oh my God, I want his job. and then I quickly realized it's not his job I want. Window cleaning is not fun in the winter. I know. My brother used to do it. What I wanted was how it looked like he was feeling, contrasted with how I was feeling in that. I was feeling overwhelmed and burdened. And I hadn't realized, I was starting to get bogged down with all of the things that had kind of got added on to what I was doing, like the administration and the staff meetings and all of this was like, oh, I don't really want to do that anymore. And I remember sitting down and just doing what I call an energy inventory. It just occurred to me to do this. And I listed all the things that were now, I just felt like hard work, draining, no interest in doing them anymore. I like filled a whole sheet of A4. And on the other side was, what is it I still love to do? What do I really love? And you know, all it was being with people and finding that space where we connect to something that's bigger than ourselves and then seeing what comes out of that. That was all I had in the other column. Mm-hmm. And somehow that made sense to me. I was like, okay, I'm just going to do that. I'm going to let everything else fall away. And I did. Mm-hmm. And so I set it up so that became my one-to-one work. And that became what I brought to the groups as well. Basically, I let go of all the content, all the stuff I thought I had to be teaching and sharing. And I would just turn up and trust that something would come through me or someone else. And that would be the raw material to work with. So again, the form of it completely changed, but it just felt to me like a deeper expression of exactly the same thing.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Ian, because I listened not so long ago to some recordings you made more recently that were on YouTube. And it really struck me that while the form of what you were talking about had changed significantly from those first recordings that I listened to them in 2002, 2003, but I expect you made them quite some time before that. While the form had changed, the feeling, the energy that was enlivening it was the same.
Yeah. Many people have told me that, and I know that to be true. I recognize it as well. Yeah.
And to me, that speaks to everything you were saying about, you know, who we really are is that energy. And that's what's seeking unique expression in the world.
Yes.
And so, yeah.
And that's what people respond to when it comes through.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, is a really important point, Jamie, because we can mistakenly think that what people are buying or interested in or responding to is the product, you know, or the service or whatever form we think it's that.
Yeah.
It's not that. That's the vehicle.
It's interesting you say that. You know, we at one point in building my training school and stuff, we asked people, why did you sign up for this program? To people who had, you know, come on like Clarity certification and things like that. And the majority of the time they said it was just a feeling.
Yeah, they don't know.
and what you were saying about the form of it kind of getting to be too much and wanting the window cleaner stuff, that's similar to what happened to me a couple of years ago. Was everything was going great, and then all of a sudden I didn't have juice for it anymore. And I've, over the last year or so, I've really been refocusing on, what do I love doing? What brings me alive in sharing with others? And I had an experience of it the other day where I wanted to write an article for my newsletter list. So I sat down to write one. And because I wanted it to be around this idea of unique expression, I started with something I was passionate about, which is the music of Frank Zappa. And I started telling a story about that. And in the process of writing that short article, I had insights into this whole domain of unique expression and saw it more deeply. So that sense of just following what's fascinating to you, what you're enthusiastic about. And yeah, the Campbell quote, follow your bliss and don't be afraid, and doors will open where there were only walls, is one way I heard it said. And I love that idea of there are walls and then all of a sudden doors start opening.
Yes. And the form can surprise you. I think some people are very close. You know, the form often it's just another version of what you've been doing already, which in my case, it's been kind of more or less that, you know. My work has changed, but not that substantially. I'm still working with groups mostly, and sometimes with individuals. It's not dissimilar. But I remember I had a friend who, she trained with me in homeopathy a long time ago. And because she was interested, as I was, she just followed her interest, and she loved people, and she had the idea of working with people would be a natural fit for her. And then she started a practice and she struggled. And so she did the advanced training, you know, the postgrad, and she still struggled. And she did the postgrad, you know. Kept me in business, you know. I was like, there's plenty of people who will go down this route. You know, they think that they need to learn more, or you know, something like that. I need more information. And at a certain point, that's not it. And it wasn't that wasn't it for my friend. And I remember we had a conversation one time, And somehow we got on to, well, you know, if you didn't have to do any of this, you know, what would you be doing? What would you? And it turns out she loved art. She loved people, but she also loved art and working with pots and clay and, you know, this kind of thing. And she also loved food and cooking. And not that long after, she has the idea to open a cafe, which was like nothing like what she'd been training to be doing.
Right.
But when that idea came to her, it felt absolutely like what she wanted to do. I mean, it sounded like a mad idea to her rational mind, but it just felt like, oh, that would be so much fun. If I had a place where people could come and I could cook for them and, you know, make all my favorite recipes. Not only that, she created one of those cafes where they have pots that people can paint, right? And she opened this years ago, and it was started as a little thing. Now it's like she owns half the street that it's on because it's kept expanding.
Wow.
And it just turned into this beautiful expression of who she really is. And at some point, the whole homeopathy idea just fell away completely. So like, what am I thinking, you know?
That's so interesting, because often I found it over the years that often people will come with a specific form of what they think it should be. Yes. And it's only as they let go of that and trust that inspiration, trust that energy, that what it's meant to be comes through.
That's it. Yeah. We have to make space for it to come in somehow. So if you're too busy doing what you think you should be doing, it's hard to hear those messages. It's hard to get a sense of it. But often people have it, I've heard it often expressed this way, people have it as the thing that they might do for fun when, you know, when they can afford to, when they retire or something like that, when the kids are grown up. They often have it on that kind of back burner, so which tells me they already know.
Yeah.
Right? They already know where the juice is, but they've created some condition in their mind that says it's not possible right now. Now, that may or may not be true. Sometimes it is. There is a timing element, I think, to these things. There's a natural unfolding, but oftentimes we make up a false schedule, which is not true.
Well, and often there's a sense of, I often find that people think it has to be in its full and finished form before they can do it, whereas there's a quote that I just love by E.L. Doctorow. He was talking about writing, but I think it applies to any act of creation. He said, writing a novel is like driving at night in fog. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole journey that way. And there's something about being willing to, okay, well, if you were to just take the next step, what would that be? And that can be enough to start awakening, like to let that energy know, oh yeah, this is a good direction, this is okay, and things start happening and falling into place.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is enough. I think that first step is enough, and often it's all that we're given initially. And you're right, the trap of the mind is, well, yeah, give me the other 10 steps that will follow that one, and I'll think about it,
and a guarantee that it's going to work out okay.
And whereas paradoxically, if we're willing to just take that first initial step, then the next, and then the thing starts to just open up, and suddenly you feel momentum. You feel like there's an energy behind this. It seems to want to happen by itself.
Yeah.
And I think that's another clue that I alert people to, and I listen out for myself. If it seems to be taking a lot of striving and efforting on my part, that's not it. There's a contamination there. If I'm striving and efforting to make or force something to happen that's not ready to happen in this way, then I just need to back off.
Yeah.
By contrast, there's a sense of ease and effortlessness when to me, it feels more like we're following, we're not directing. Like the energy seems to want to go this way. Okay, I'll just follow it and see where it's leading me. That's what it feels like to me. It's an allowing and an unfolding. It's not I'm not imposing my idea of what should be happening. And that's a different mode. For some people, it takes people a while to get used to that mode. If they've been feeling like they were in the driving seat of their life, you know, up until that point, it feels passive initially. You know, people, and some people will judge it as like, that's just lazy, you know, just sitting around not doing, as it were. But it's not really that. It's a misunderstanding, I think. To me, it's recognizing that there is this other mode that we can put ourselves in, which is actually more effective when it comes to bringing through your unique expression.
my guess is that there are people listening to this who they may even be aware of it right now, that their heads are going, oh, that's easy for Ian and Jamie. They don't have X, Y, and Z going on. But that's while there may be valid concerns in there, that noise in the head is part of the thing that keeps us from looking in that direction, taking one step in that direction, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and you and I still have that noise in our head, right? I know I do.
Yeah, no, I definitely do. And that's the funny thing, you know, I posted a few weeks ago that I had a realization that, like, I had a realization a few years ago, which the words that came with the beautiful feeling were, oh, you're going to have a beautiful life and work you love, and you don't even need to know how it's going to happen. And that kind of speaks to what we're talking about. And I know it in my heart. I know that it's true. And yet I'd still been kind of thinking, okay, so I need to get my ducks in a row in a certain way in order for that to happen. What I realized is, no, that's bullshit. That's bullshit. You just have to trust that feeling. But what I'm finding is that doing that, being true to that, it's scary and noisy and all of that. So I'm literally going through that at the moment, but I'm committed to it 100%. Like there's no turning back. So it's that McKenna thing of take the leap of faith, jump into the abyss kind of thing.
Yeah, that's it. No, I think it's good for people to hear that, Jimmy, because, you know, I still get in a tangle and I still get into a state of mind that tries to convince me that I need to just knuckle down and work hard and push through and all this nonsense. And yet what I've learned, and the principles understanding is so helpful in this regard, is that you can trust the feeling. So the feeling that brings for me is a feeling of stress and difficulty and strain and pressure and overwhelm. And what I know is that that's not the direction that I need to orient in. So if I start feeling that to me now it's not feedback that says work harder, Ian, you know, try more, do more. No, that's feedback that says to me, go for a walk, take a time out, have a holiday, you know. Even if my bank balance isn't looking too rosy at the moment, I don't care. I just give myself a time out. I look in the direction of what would be nourishing for me right now. What would help to reinforce that sense of trust and that sense of possibility and that sense of ease. Listen to the things that inspire me, that have inspired me in the past. Read the things that evoke that sense of possibility. That's what I've learned to do. And then I can, once I settle down, I know for a fact that as soon as I settle down, I'll know what to do that's the right thing. And it will feel right. And it will have that quality of ease and energy and flow behind it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a great place to finish the conversation, is that question for people. What would be nourishing for you? What would allow you to cultivate that sense of trust in that inner guidance and that unique expression in you? Ian, thank you so much for this. Where can people find out about you and what you're up to if they want to get in touch?
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. It's always a pleasure. My website is theinsightspace.com, so people can have a look on there, and there's resources that people can listen to and watch for free. And also I'm on Facebook. If anyone's on there, they can find me there too.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you again soon.
Hope so, Jamie. Thank you.